Before we jump into this episode, we have to share two very important caveats with our listeners. The first of which is that all topics discussed in this interview are done so for entertainment and educational purposes only. Mushroom Hour does not condone the use or cultivation of any illicit or regulated substances, but we also don't condemn it. And the second caveat is that this interview was recorded in January of 2021, and since then, both of our guests, Dr. K. Mandrake and Virginia Haze, have reached out to us to make it very clear that they are huge supporters of the work of Oakland Hyphy, who since this interview was recorded have had 2 episodes aired on Mushroom Hour, and the information that that group is bringing forth may have changed some of the conversation between the guests of this episode and myself when it comes to psilocybin content and other compounds within psilocybe mushrooms. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the interview. Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on the Mushroom Hour podcast, we have the honor of speaking with authors Virginia Haze and Dr. K. Mandrake. Dr. Mandrake is a proponent of psychedelics from both a scientific and personal growth perspective. His long and varied education has mostly centered on biology, toxicology, and mycology, culminating in a PhD in microbiology, which greatly influenced his home mushroom growing methods. Virginia Haze is a prolific writer and photographer with many books under her belt. She's a regular contributor to publications that focus on recreational drugs, and her photography has appeared in many books. She learned to grow mushrooms under the tutelage of Dr. K. Mandrake and has co-authored 2 books on the growing and use of shrooms, and has since become a fierce proponent of psilocybin decriminalization and the dissemination of science-backed information relating to psychedelics. I'm excited to speak with these 2 myconauts today about their 2 books they've written together, the Psilocybin Mushroom Bible and the Psilocybin Chef Cookbook. Virginia and Dr. Mandrake, or Dr. K, whichever you prefer, thank you so much for coming on Mushroom Hour.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, really excited to talk to you, Darren.
Well, I am really excited to talk to you guys. As I said right before the show, your works have kind of entered my consciousness because so many people I knew were devouring them and just loving everything about the books. And so I'm really excited to have the chance to speak with you both. And of course, when you get into the world of homegrown mushrooms and then growing psilocybe, there's a massive community, loads of information to cover. But before we dive into it, I am always curious, what drew you each into the world of fungi?
I guess I can take that one first because mine, I guess, maybe goes back a tiny bit further. I mean, when I kind of recount these stories, it makes me feel quite old, but it kind of goes back to like 2005 for me, which is the point at which it was that summer when psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, were made illegal in the UK. They used to be legal; you could buy them fresh in like
They
stores
were
and things.
legal. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. Only certain shops. It wasn't like the supermarket or whatever, but like there were certain shops, basically like smart shops, sort of head shops, that sort of thing. And they were made illegal, so all of the head shops were selling their stock like really, really fast because they didn't want to be caught once the shutters came down. We were just like, well, it's a couple of weeks before this ban comes in. Like, what are they all about? And me and a few friends tried them, thought they were incredible, like everyone who's experienced magic mushrooms knows the feeling for the first time and stuff. And yeah, it was kind of a shocker to me that this thing that was once legal had just been made in the worst level of legal classification you can get in the UK. It's the same as like heroin and cocaine and that sort of thing. And then shortly after that, a few years later, there's a guy called David Nutt. I don't know if you've heard of him. He does a lot of the studies out of Imperial now on psilocybin. He basically runs the psilocybin research program there. He was originally an advisor for the government scientific advisory panel on classification of drugs. So it was his job to provide science-based information on drug classification. And he came out with 2 papers in short succession about 4 years later in 2009 that classified magic mushrooms as one of the least dangerous drugs you could possibly take on a scientific basis. So it was harm to the user and harm to society, and they were right down at the bottom. And when he came out with this empirical classification, he also made claims that taking ecstasy was less dangerous than horse riding, and a few like attention grabbing headlines. And the government said, well, cool, thanks for the scientific information, you're now fired. So he was then fired from his position as the trusted advisor, and he went off to do great things with Imperial, which has been great. But it was those kind of two moments together where I was like, none of this is based on harm. This is all based on sending messages, and there's a lot of politics in this. And, it kind of got me quite annoyed at that point, and I kind of started growing just as almost as an act of rebellion, but also because they were super fun. And that's basically how I got into it. It's kind of a long story with a long through line.
Well, it's funny how ridiculous prohibition always seems when you actually address science, and funny for you, it was actually the prohibition was the trigger to look more into this substance, which again is usually the case. And then it sounds like you were the one that kind of influenced Virginia and her early relationship. Or Virginia, how did you end up getting into fungi, maybe psilocybin specifically?
Well, it's actually a strange kind of story. It actually was Dr. K, but probably probably not in the way you'd imagine. So I met K on a Thai island. So a very small
Scene
island
change over to Thailand. Got it.
in Thailand would that have been the summer of 2008, I think.
Mm.
And we we went to, we were young and we did all the things you do when you're in Thailand when you're young. So we went to one of the huge beach parties and we drank a lot, and my recollection of the evening is hazy, but I believe at some point I bought a mushroom shake off of somebody, and that was an experience, let's say. Like it really brought home to me later in my life how set and setting are really important in a mushroom experience. And this was far from ideal, but from what I remember, I had quite a great time anyway. Although not when it the next day we had to get back to our island, and I ended up like vomiting off the side of a boat from what I recall. But I suppose in there was the kernel of like interest, and I'd always been interested in kind of like going outside of the lines to find what could expand your experience or what could change how you see the world and how you see yourself. So it was a kind of natural step for me to take, although looking back I probably would have taken it in a different place first.
Yeah, maybe you learned that shroom shake from a stranger on a beach in Thailand, maybe not ideal, but still you had a good experience. And that was one of my questions, that I have for most people that I talk to about psilocybin is what was it about the initial experience or the first couple of experiences that drove you then to want to explore further and to cultivate and think, I kind of need this in my life? Because obviously there's one side, the prohibition side, that demonizes this as like a drug, it's horrible. And I think we all know that that's kind of made up, like you said, to project fear and kind of send messages. But what is it from an anecdotal side about your guys' experiences that really left you with the impression that you wanted more and caused you to really develop a much deeper relationship with philosophy?
Yeah, I think for me it was just sharing that experience with friends and kind of realizing, we weren't able to n- access these things anymore. And just realizing, we had to become kind of self-sufficient if that's what we wanted continued access to. And a lot of the problems created a lot of the problems with prohibition are created by prohibition itself, so you
Right.
create a black market for things. It's a little bit different with something like magic mushrooms, but you introduce poor practices, and people adding things to their drugs, and that sort of thing, just to kind of, there's no kind of control of it really. So yeah, it was the need to be safe but also still have access to the things regardless of their legal status.
Yeah, mine was similar as well. I actually moved to North America shortly after my Thailand experience. I feel like that should have like capital letters. My Thailand experience.
It's a chapter defining moment.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I actually think it's easier to get access to shrooms in the UK than it was, at least where I was living in North America at the time. Because as Dr. K said, it had been kind of, semi-recently legal. And then in the UK, we have like a quite good disrespect for the law in a lot of ways.
Right.
But yeah, I got to North America and I found it was really easy to get access to things that we wouldn't really have in the UK, like Percocet and like really heavy kind of opioid things, which I wasn't that interested in. But I was a lot more interested in, more natural things, more kind of mind expanding things like shrooms. And I just found those a lot more difficult to get hold of. I was living in North America at the time when I first tried to grow them, and it did not go very well.
That was one of my next questions, were how did your guys' first attempts at cultivation wind up? So yours didn't go very well. Now, Dr. K, I know you had some background in science. So what was your first experience trying to cultivate magic mushrooms like?
Yeah, I mean, mine didn't go very well either. Like, it was kind of in the early days of me sort of being at university and that sort of thing, and having the freedom and the space to sort of, not have to worry about hiding stuff from parents or that sort of thing when you're that, like, if you're younger than that age, then it's a real problem, right? So yeah, I was cultivating at university, and I was following lots of posts on the shroomery and like trying to put all the information together. And you read like hundreds of different opinions on the way to do something when you go online, and it's really hard to pull out the information that's relevant. So, I was constantly attentive to it, and this is, I think, a lot of new growers find this. They'll just want to check it every 5 minutes, like, are the mushrooms yet? Are the mushrooms yet? And I think I sort of hugged it to death, and like nothing really happened. They didn't contaminate, but they never grew. I don't know if I got really unlucky with a non-fruiting strain in the very beginning, but no matter what I did, I could not get them to fruit. But they stayed alive, they just never did anything. So yeah, I just tried again and again, and kind of iteratively then got the process, and managed to be quite successful, I guess.
Yeah, clearly you're now writing books about it. And that was part of the book that I really enjoyed, was hearing about some of your guys' inspirations. You just named a big one. I think that, for anyone who follows my social media, follows the podcast, I'm not an expert by any means in psychedelics. And I always direct people over to shroomery. Inevitably 90% of people who are searching for hashtag mushrooms on whatever social media are looking for psychedelic varieties. And I always kind of forward them over to shroomery as such a great resource. But then you guys were also influenced, it sounded like, by the famous work by the McKenna brothers, whose pen names now that are escaping my mind, but the McKenna brothers and Paul Stamets' work as well about growing mushrooms.
Yeah, I have to say my issue is completely different to Dr. K's. I do not come from a science background. I come from like an arts and philosophy background. So I didn't know anything about best practice. I didn't know anything about like how to avoid contamination. And they immediately were just completely mold ridden. It was like it was a it was a bad time. But one of the issues was that I was trying to learn from very outdated books. So the books that I got hold of, which I believe were the most recent ones at the time, were like, 70s and early 80s books. And they just didn't really speak to me. Perhaps they weren't putting the information across in a way that I could really access as a kind of non-scientific brain. But yeah, Paul Stamets was a huge, huge influence on both of us. I remember reading Mycelium Running, which is, just an incredible book as well. And for me, my own experience trying to grow showed me that there was like a real gap in the market for a book that would take people from the very beginning to, even if we just did it to like the end of a first grow and we didn't go into the advanced methods, it would have been super, super helpful, because the shroomery is great and there's a lot of information on Reddit even, and there are lots of things online, but you've no idea who those people are. You've no idea if what they're telling you is correct until you do it and you find out for yourself, because often the scientific background isn't given. Some places you do see it and that's amazing, and you should always try and find like a scientific backing for what is being told to you. But yeah, it's just so difficult on the internet to kind of parse what's legit and what isn't.
So then your guys' own need for a cultivation manual sounds like probably got the gears turning for the Psilocybin Mushroom Bible then.
Yeah, definitely. I think the way I kind of look at the book is it's kind of like the way that we kind of made our way through and made our failings and our mistakes through the process, just so you can follow from like start to finish. Because yeah, like Virginia said, you'll pick up a random post on the shroomery and you don't know whether it's like good or whether it'll quite work for you. And also a lot of the things we identified is because it's the shroomery was and still is mostly like US centric. A lot of the stuff you have to source in the UK is a little bit difficult. So we can kind of write for both audiences who might not be able to access certain ingredients and stuff. I mean, a lot more of it is widely available now, but at the time it certainly wasn't.
Yeah, when I tried to grow in North America, I could just walk a few blocks and like walk into a head shop and buy some spores, which has kind of never been the case in the UK, I don't think. And
Mm,
yeah, we did kind of have a slightly unique perspective on like what could work in, both sides of the Atlantic. And I also had worked with our publisher. So our publisher is Green Candy Press. And I'd worked with them on a bunch of like cannabis growing books
okay.
and various other things. And there was just such a huge influx of cannabis growing books at that time. And I was like, well, what I need is a shroom shroom growing book. And for years I tried to like keep it at the back of my mind. And then Dr. K and I ended up living in the same country again, actually kind of around the corner from each other. And that was when we were like, well, why don't we write this book?
Right. Well, and that's important to find a publisher because not every publisher, when you come knocking on their door to say, I want to grow a manual for successful psilocybin mushroom grows, I'd imagine you get even more than some raised eyebrows. You get some outright rejections. So I was wondering, what kind of publisher you guys are able to find, what that relationship is like. And it sounds like that's kind of the perfect marriage of having the people who are ready to put out this kind of information, having you guys be co-located so you could actually take the time to put together the book. And yeah, I was saying to you before the show, I think one of the biggest things that strikes me about this book, aside from just being an amazing layout of explaining some background on just mushroom biology and the effects that psilocybin has, going through a little bit of the history of this movement, like you just said, with Shroomery and Paul Stamets, some of the other folks that really contributed to the knowledge base, and then really good step-by-step instructions with kind of variables mentioned in there, like, hey, you could do it this way if you don't want to do it this way, or if this is all you have access to, do it this way. Beautiful pictures. And then it's also just downright funny. And I think that was one of the things about the book that really struck me was just how fun it was to read because you guys had such a good sense of humor laced throughout it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, that's like Green Candy really let us do that as well. Like they're very down to earth. They have like a really strong belief in information. Like you should put information out there for everybody. Like it should just be accessible. And yeah, they really trusted us on tone, I suppose. And it just kind of came out naturally, but also like why not? Why not have a little fun with it? You're gonna mess up, you're gonna do all kinds of things that are kind of weird and funky, and that's okay because we all make mistakes as we go on this journey. So why not laugh?
Yeah, definitely. I think our approach is kind of like lowbrow humor, stupid puns, and then the occasional top shelf scientific word thrown in there for good measure.
Right. It has something in there for everybody. So just diving in then to some of that information, one of the things that I struck right at the beginning that you talk about was climate. Something I never really thought of. Maybe it's because I've spent the last 8 years in California where our climate doesn't vacillate that much. But what does your local climate have to do with any attempts you have at cultivating psilocybe or maybe any kind of mushrooms?
Yeah, if you're in somewhere that's like pretty stable, the kind of further away you move from the equator, the more your temperatures are going to fluctuate over a given year. So for us, we were really conscious of sort of doing everything with the seasons. So like it's the same kind of off topic, but I kind of bring that process in, if I'm doing gardening or, if I'm making food around the house or something, like bringing in seasonality to it. And we get a good enough window to produce a good amount of psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, in a summer that'll last a year or two at the very, very least. So yeah, we just thought, rather than like focus on ways to sort of modify your climate to make these mushrooms able to grow. I mean, obviously, if you're in somewhere where the climate is always perfect, then great. But, for people who aren't, you don't need to grow all year round. You might fail one summer, but the next summer will be better and you'll learn from your mistakes. And that's still how I grow now, like everything sort of shuts down over the winter and I spend that time thinking about what to improve on next time. It gives you that sort of distance to think about things as well, rather than just keep doing things and not really having like a plan to things.
Yeah, I am coming from like a background of being around a lot of people who are growing weed. People often say to me like, well, what kind of temperature and humidity controls and all these kind of things do I need? And I'm like Dr. K. This probably comes from living so far north compared to like you, Darren. We really do have to think seasonally, but we're also both quite like sustainably minded these days. So like we get a like fruit and veg box, which is kind of all local and all seasonal veg, and you just adapt your life around what is in abundance at one particular time, and then we pickle a hell of a lot of stuff, and
Yeah.
It's about being sustainable. It's about working with the environment that you've got, and like Dr. K says, you really don't need to. I mean, for like a personal use, you really don't need to grow all year round. You can grow some, like even with one monotub. I mean, we got like,
Yeah.
what was it, like 2,000 grams wet, I think we got off one monotub. We got like 6 flushes off it. I just threw it in a closet and it just kept flushing.
Yeah, it was right near the end of the point where we were writing up the book and we were like, why won't it stop? Like, we don't have time to consume all of these. Like, this is crazy.
But then also you can distill that into ways like in my freezer right now, I have like an alcohol extraction, which I think is from that same monotub grow, which would have been like maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. And maybe it's not as potent as it used to be, but like, why not live like that?
Yeah.
If you work against it and you make it so your house or your flat or whatever is warm enough to grow shrooms naturally all the year round, that's actually really bad for the environment too. So why not? Why not work with the temperatures that you have and the climate that you have, and just take what you need really.
And that gets echoed throughout the book. Actually, you guys do a good job of talking about sustainability considerations. And I think anyone who does any kind of DIY science, especially DIY mycology, we're all getting more and more cognizant about the waste associated with that, both energy, but also plastic materials. And I mean, some of it's unavoidable, but I think you guys do a great job of kind of pointing out that sustainability aspect. And this idea of climate was one that I just had never even thought of. And I think it'll also save people frustration if you are, let's say in the northeastern United States, you want to do a mushroom grow. And I know some people, have time over winter breaks to get projects like that started. Well, you might not have as much success. You might be, driving yourself crazy trying to grow when it's just not the ideal climate. So that's kind of this basic and intuitive point that I really hadn't seen elsewhere that I really liked. And another thing that I liked about you do this good job of, like I said, pointing out basic mushroom biology and then giving us kind of a little bit of the history of psilocybe as a larger genus and some of the different species in there. Now, the book focuses on Psilocybe cubensis, but can you cultivate other psilocybe varieties as well?
Yeah, I mean, Psilocybe cubensis is obviously the most easy to grow, but there are a variety of species if you want to really push out. One thing that we've been working with recently a lot is some of the truffle producers. They're actually sclerotia, but
Right.
from a mycological perspective, a truffle is something that contains the spores. A sclerotia is just a hardened mass of mycelium. So everyone calls them truffles. They're actually sclerotia, but I'll continue to call them truffles because that's like common language. And yeah, we've been kind of working with them, and they're super interesting to grow because you don't actually have to fruit anything. You can do everything in a jar. You can spawn it to bulk, and then you can grow mushrooms off that, but you can get psychoactive material for probably less input, but it takes a little longer. So, that's an example. And then there's like outdoor beds with like wood chips and things like that. And that's a little more letting nature take its course and sort of administrating and kind of pushing it in the right direction. So, there are things you can do for that. And if and when we update the book, we will definitely include some of these methods as well, because they're things we've played around with in the years since.
Really great to see you guys laying out some of the different species. Yeah, some of the potential kind of outdoor cultivation slash management of some mushrooms like that. But I guess, why are cubensis the go-to? I mean, why are they synonymous with magic mushrooms?
Yeah, so I think like you touched on before, I think it's a lot of the work from Terence and Dennis McKenna really sort of put them on the map in the 70s. I know they devised their methods from some laboratory protocol for growing button mushrooms and getting them to fruit in a very small space, essentially how you would do like a cased grain jar now. And then they developed that into cubensis. And like we were talking about with climate and things, I think they just sit in like the perfect window for like room temperature, easily controlled in a household. Like some of the other species, you might need it to be a little colder. Like the parameters aren't just quite there. And I think it's just from a happy coincidence that all of those growth parameters like fit really well within kind of your standard home.
And I probably should have started with this at the very beginning, but I do want to throw out the caveat that obviously we're not encouraging one to participate in activities that are illegal in whatever country you're in. That was something you point out in the book as well, was being safe with this kind of pursuit. If you are interested in exploring any kind of psilocybes, be cognizant of the laws where you live. I believe you guys said in Spain, they're totally legal still.
Yeah, and Portugal, I think now as well.
See, some countries are more advanced than we are in the rest of the world with kind of understanding the futility of prohibition and trying to regulate nature. But something that is related to that you point out in the book, tools to do this safely. Because a lot of us, you guys are in the UK, I'm in North America, this is still federally prohibited. Even though some cities like near me, Oakland has quote unquote decriminalized them, there are still stories of persecution and people actually still getting in trouble for doing any of this kind of exploration. So, what were some of the recommendations that you had to people that if they were interested in researching this topic or doing any of this, playing with psilocybe genus, what were some ways that you recommended to be safe about it?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that's like really related to what's going on now is I think it's really easy to look at, the medical model or the decriminalization and think, well, this is on its way in one direction and one direction only. So, I can be more safe. I can tell, all of my friends about my mushroom grow and stuff, but we would still say it's still illegal for a lot of people, most people, in fact. So just don't you don't need to be like telling all your friends about it. Just stay really safe. Don't think that you're going to get swept along on a wave of psychedelic acceptance, because a lot of people are getting left behind with the way things are changing. So you've still got to be careful. You've still got to know your local laws, and make a decision on your terms on what you're willing to sort of transgress, if you like. A lot of places the spores are legal, and they're
Mm.
sold with the caveat of like for microscopy purposes only. So, as long as you've got your microscope and you're doing your microscopy, then you're totally fine. As soon as you germinate that and produce mycelium, then you're breaking the law in a lot of places. So yeah, just sort of keep these things in mind, and don't expect like spore vendors or anything to give you advice on how to grow, because you'll put them in a really difficult position legally as well, because they can't tell you any advice on that, because they don't want to be seen to be legally encouraging any of this, even though the spores are in a gray area. Everyone's got to kind of do the right things and play the game, sort of thing, in that case. But just think about how it affects other people, think about who you want to tell, and yeah, just be more careful. You'd rather be more careful and nothing happen than not careful enough and something terrible happen.
I would also add to that, the internet is not like some lawless Wild West place. Like, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook.
Right.
People seem to believe that there's nothing on the internet that could affect them. Like, we have quite a popular Instagram account now, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't believe the amount of people I get like trying to buy shrooms off us. And I'm like, one, we don't sell them. Like, it would be stupid. Two, you don't know who we are. You don't know who's behind that account. We could be cops, and you're reaching out to strangers and being like, here's my home address and here's my bank account details. Can I buy some shrooms off you? Like, that's just not a smart way to do anything. And on the other way, like, there are cops on social media sites who
Right.
will try and like catfish people into trying to buy things off them. And you really have to kind of think about your digital safety in this kind of thing. And I think we talk about it in the book as well. Anything that you use for home growing, buy it in person if you can, buy it in cash. There are things that you can buy that will not arouse much suspicion, like agar plates and things like this. But
Right.
if there's it's the same as if you're growing weed. If there's anything that's really particularly obvious, try not to do it online. And things like Bitcoin can be really good for that too.
Yeah, and you guys also mentioned, using a VPN to proxy out your IP address if you're buying something online. And what struck me is these are actually some good protocols in the era we're living in of kind of increasing digital surveillance. I think you guys just gave some good tips for anyone who wants to browse with a little less or with a little more privacy. Gave some good tools and a reminder to us that, yes, you're constantly being watched. Anything you do can usually be traced right back to your IP address. So I did want to put those words of caution out to people and those best practices out to people because, yeah, you do find that now where everyone just thinks that it's kind of okay to just talk about this out in the open. And okay, I get messages all the time, which I never even talk about psilocybin. I get people asking me, oh yeah, do you sell shrooms? Do you know where I can get them? Do you know? And it's just best to kind of stay out of that on social media or to the internet. And one of the big ones people constantly ask me about is where can I get spores? That's everyone's question. You just talked about the dance you have to do, not saying you're doing any cultivation, strictly for microscopy. What advice do you have to people, though, who are looking to get spores for microscopy or for any explorations in cultivation? What are some tips there? Because I know that's one of the main questions that people have to get started.
Yeah, there's a bunch of places you can get spores from now. There are lots of vendors, more and more every couple of weeks you see a new spore vendor sort of pop up with their own website and stuff. Some of the longest standing ones, I know Sporeworks have been really good and used in the past. They've been used by the Shroomery for ages as well. Like, they've been going for a real long time and they're generally pretty well trusted. For others, you can go on Reddit and you can find, I can't remember, I think it's called Spore Traders now. It went down for a little while a few weeks ago. I think it's still that subreddit, but if you search around that, you'll find the active subreddit for it. But again, with that, you need to check ratings, make sure people have got like verified status. You can see that other people have had things shipped and they're happy with what they've got. Just don't approach any random person on Reddit or in that sub and expect someone to help you out, because obviously, like we talked about with the risks, but also just getting good quality spores. Like, we've
Right.
seen a lot of people get burned either getting the wrong spores or getting really contaminated spores. So, there are ways to work around both of them, but if you put an order in for a tomato and you get an apple, you're going to be pretty annoyed. So, like, you often can't find that out. It took me a whole summer once to realize that some spores that I had were the wrong species. So yeah, you've got to be pretty careful. It's also worth saying for people in the US, California, Georgia, and Idaho, spores are completely illegal. So,
Right.
don't a lot of the more reputable vendors won't sell there. So, you don't have to, like, there's a little bit of a safeguard there, but do your research and know that, like, you could be taking a risk in those states in particular.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a lot of common sense, but it's basically just make sure you're always kind of keeping that awareness about you whenever you're engaging in any kind of buying or sourcing, really any kind of supplies, but especially spores. Use that common sense. Be safe about it always. So you guys make a great point of that in the book, and I just wanted to call that out for the listeners. And now we kind of get into, for me, the fun part of the book, where you guys do this great. I'm kind of working with this stepwise progression that you lay out in the book because I like how it's organized. But you get into basically the kit and the hardware you need for getting into the cultivation or getting into the grow. And this is something that applies both for psilocybe, but also any of these tools, any of this hardware that you talk about building is something that can be used by any mushroom grower, even if you're just doing edible or medicinal. So I was telling a friend of mine, I think this is a great book just for anyone who wants to grow mushrooms, because you do a great job talking about some of the basic equipment you need. What is some of the hardware that you guys talk about building? Like, what are some of the key pieces that every mushroom grower needs that you can build yourself at home?
Yeah, so I think the still air box is a good one. It's not necessary for all species. For a long time, and for most of the work we did with the book, we had like a small sort of, bathrooms are great, or small sort of rooms that you can work with and sort of sanitize, get as clean as possible, sort of bleach bomb the air or whatever. But after a few attempts doing that and like breathing in sort of bleach mist, it kind of wasn't the funnest. So I was like, what, I'm just going to make a still air box now. And it's a lot easier. You can kind of pop it up wherever you go. If you go somewhere else and you want to do a bit of mushroom cultivation, you bring your still air box along and you've got a sterile space to work in. So I'd say you can get away with it, but a still air box is super easy to make and makes for a lot more versatility when you work. The only thing I would say with the still air box is make sure it's tall enough or big enough, because if you suddenly find your box is the wrong size and you're kind of nudging all your jars and everything is banging against the sides, it gets really annoying and claustrophobic really quickly. So go for the biggest box you think you need and then add a little bit more space even then, I would say. But then, yeah, other things, you can build terrariums yourself. You can make monotubs really easily. And like you say, there is this like ecology of vendors now. And I think a lot of the stuff that we did was, 5 years ago, and none of that existed
Mm.
5 years ago. So, I think it's really cool that there are all these vendors for sure. And I think there is absolutely no problem with people deciding to, buy something in rather than make it, because maybe they don't have the time or the space, or they're just not into like, making certain things. So I think it's really great that people can do that, but we'd always encourage people to at least try making it once and see how much of a hassle it is or isn't for you, and then make a decision off the basis of that.
And you know what, too? It really makes you more involved with the process. Like, I mean, it's fun too. I learned, like when we made the stir plate, I was like, oh my God, this is magic. This is this is like a fan and some magnets. Like we made a thing. And I mean, it must have been funny for Dr. K because he was kind of living a double life because he was working in a lab at the time and then coming to like my place and we throw together some like, MacGyvered kind of thing. But it really does make you think in a different way, I think. Like we're both huge like home cooks as well. And we really like to both do things from the ground up as much as possible. And I think it just gets you involved in the correct way of thinking. And also, why spend money if you don't have to spend it? Like, a lot of people who will be reading this book will not have access to, things you can buy online. Maybe they're living like in a place in the US where it's harder to get those things, but also maybe they just don't have hundreds and hundreds of dollars that they want to sink into a project that is like a brand new experience for them. So if you have like a old plastic tub and a drill, you can make a terrarium.
And there is something fun that, yeah, you said it perfectly. It gets you more involved in the process. When I first got into just any kind of culturing and working in any kind of lab, it was a place in Oakland, kind of this biohacker lab space called Counterculture Labs. And we would have projects where everyone would sit down and we'd make, a still air box, or even though we had this giant laminar flow hood there, we'd still like do some of these projects because there's something just fun about like the DIY aspect, but also just this kind of like mycelium underground aspect. We're building our own tools. So I love that you lay that out in there. And I think it makes it eminently approachable for anyone. Just these basic pieces. You can build really all the kit you're going to need to do even some of the more advanced things like working with agar, like using liquid culture. You can do all of that just in a still air box. And then obviously fruiting in a monotub or terrarium. So I like that aspect of it. But one thing I do want to touch on, because I think it's something every mushroom grower of any stripe has to get intimately familiar with. And it sounds like in your guys, or at least you, Virginia, your early grow, you quickly encountered contamination. So what, and again, this is something you do great in the book, but what are some of the vectors for contamination and what are some of the stages that it shows up? And how do you guys try to monitor and root out any contaminated grows or any contaminated items before things go too far?
It's one of the things that is probably very different in a kind of post-COVID world, where the most helpful thing is to imagine yourself as a disgusting carrier of all kinds of
Which we all think
bacteria
now. Yeah.
Yeah, not too much of a stretch
and
of
viruses.
imagination for me.
Well, like it was for me coming from a non-science background, it was a real thing to learn. Like, you might go, well, my preparation area is really clean, but like you are disgusting. Like your hair, like your breath, your hands, all these things can bring in contamination. And like mold is so prevalent. Mold will like take hold in all kinds of places. So yeah, we talk a lot in the book about best practice and like sterile procedure as much as you can. And Dr. K is probably the best one to speak of that.
Yeah, I think just having a good process in place, knowing why you're doing things to keep the space clean, and the difference between sterile and sanitary, for example. So something straight out of a pressure cooker is sterile after it's been pressure cooked, obviously. But then inside the still air box, that's only sanitary because it's, you've wiped it down, but you can't guarantee that all the mold spores have been killed. So you're working with like a percentage game there of like how well you've cleaned it. Whereas, inside a pressure cooker, that's sterile. If the pressure cooker's set up right, then it's sterile. But everything else sort of outside of that is, you can only get it clean. You can't get it sterile. So yeah, just being able to monitor for things. There are loads of pictures in the book of what a good grow looks like, what a bad grow looks like. And then just being able to recognize those. Once you get a few grows under your belt, or once you even fail a few times, you start to quickly learn what mold looks like. And you start learning about magic mushrooms, and you become a specialist in mold because you're identifying all these different species. So yeah, I think just like have a go. Don't worry if you fail. Do a few more jars than you think you need, maybe, if you're going to do it that way. And then you've got some comparisons. A few will work. Visual inspections always work really well. Know what to look out for. We
Right.
do hear growers sometimes who are like, hey, like got all my jars, and it really stinks in here. Like, why does it smell so bad? And we're just like, you've got so much contamination. Like, this is not what it should smell like. Like, it shouldn't smell terrible, you know? So yeah,
Yeah.
just knowing what to look out for, I guess. And if it stinks, it's bad.
I actually think it's better to have like a few bad grows
Yeah.
because then you know what to look for. Like we talk to a lot of people who send us pictures of mycelium growing and they're like, is this mold? And it's like, well, in a way, it's all a fungus. And I get what you're saying. So it's really good to see what's not mycelium and what is.
Yes, and I think that actually can be the tomentose stage of mycelium growth, right? Because having done a little bit of DIY cultivation myself, sometimes the mycelium does kind of look like mold. So, I mean, what are those two different types of mycelium growth, and what might we be confusing with mold?
Yeah, so I think with the tomentose and the rhizomorphic, so the rhizomorphic is like the long root-like strains, right? And they kind of like reach out across the substrate and they look almost like veiny or root-like, basically. Rhizomorph is what that means. And then the tomentose is the like little fuzzy growth. And I think the difference between those two like with Psilocybin cubensis, it can switch between those growth stages. And if you're looking at your grow sort of like making its way along and you're getting used to what it looks like and it suddenly switches, you think, oh my God, something's changed. That must be bad. But it could just be like changing its growth patterns at that particular time. So, you can work on isolating specific strains or, certain genetics that will always be tomentose or always be rhizomorphic. But yeah, just knowing the difference between those two is really good as well, to know not to confuse. Like, just because it's changed its morphology doesn't mean it's a contamination problem. It's just a quirk of biology, I guess.
Well, and we all know that psilocybin containing mushrooms bruise blue when you handle them. Is that the case for mycelium as well? And could that potentially throw off growers if mycelium starts bruising blue? Or is that a valid concern? This is something I kind of heard on online forums.
Yeah, if your substrate is a one that you'll be using like a few times, so even with like PF Tech cakes, when you pick up the cake to pull off the mushroom, it can bruise blue where you've held it. Or like with the monotub, we recommend people do like a few flushes with their monotub and soak it in between, and it can get very blue, but there's like a very distinct blue color to it. It's kind of like a more navy blue,
Mm.
whereas like mold tends to be kind of more like teal, like more bluey green.
Yeah, you pull out the
Yeah,
little color
we
chart.
yeah. Well, this is why like we wanted the book to be so photo heavy as well, because like these things are so hard to describe in words. Like, cobweb mold could be described in exactly the same way as rhizomorphic growth. And it's only really the fact that it grows so much quicker and it spreads out so aggressively that you could probably describe it to someone, but it's so much easier to have a photo of it. And what we've been doing, well, what I did last summer was kind of like make sure some of my PF techniques were contaminated so I could get all these different molds to get these new pictures of different types of contaminants, so that any second edition of the book we do, we can have like a visual kind of reference for that.
And we can also claim that any contamination we've done on purpose. So.
On purpose, yeah.
That's perfect. Yes, you're trying to get that contamination. It's actually going to be the superstar of a second edition.
Yeah.
Well, just as a quick overview then of just the cultivation process, obviously there's a whole book people can read through the cultivation process, but what's the general flow when you're talking about, and again, this will apply to any kind of mushrooms, but what's that general flow maybe from very beginning to end, and how you can keep that process going yourself?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to get started, and you can make it more or less complicated depending on your requirements. But I'd say the most simple process is spores to grain to bulk substrate. Then you get your mushrooms and you go back to spores and you start the cycle again. So it's like a 3-step process. So that's assuming your spores are nice and clean and it's going to germinate well on your grain. You can then like multiply your grain out into more and more jars until you've got the right amount that you need. Put it into your bulk substrate, let that grow for as long as is required for the species that you're working with, depending on, tailor the substrate requirements to what the species likes. And then grow your mushrooms, and then take your spores from the mushrooms, and then you can get started again. Another more complicated process is it's good for kind of picking out good growth patterns in the beginning and taking them all the way through to the end. And it's a bit better if you're trying to like dial in the process a bit more. So you can take your spores into agar, your agar into grain, and then your grain into bulk substrate. And on the agar, you can do all your selection, especially if you're not sure where the spores came from. You can make sure that they're not contaminated so you don't spend weeks growing mold. You can do it all in agar really quickly, find the areas of growth that are good, transfer them out, that sort of thing. Then you can also use liquid culture in the process, which is a really good way to step up the volume of mycelium really, really quickly. And then you can use that into grain. You want to make sure you're putting in good quality, either spores or agar into that liquid culture, because you can. It's really hard to distinguish between mycelium and mold in liquid culture because you don't have as much contrast when everything's sort of fuzzy and floating around. So make sure you've got a good liquid culture, which is where agar comes in. And then you can go through grain and, through into bulk substrate. Liquid culture also stores really well long term in the fridge, which is a good way of having something that's ready to hit the ground running. Because spores can take a little bit of time, you can just store it in the fridge for like a year or two, depending on the species.
Yeah, for me, I had always noticed a lot of problems with liquid culture in the past just because I couldn't tell what was mold and what wasn't. I was also getting a lot of contamination. So for you guys, what's kind of your ideal liquid culture mix?
Yeah, so I think I normally just use straight honey for most of my liquid cultures. I find that does the job. I've noticed more nutrient dense things like malt extract. You can sometimes get like way too much growth and it can become quite hard to inoculate. Like, you'll block your syringe or something like that. It depends on the species you're working with, but you can get these huge like mycelial mats forming almost on the top. And it's like, okay, that was maybe a little bit too much nutrients. So you can play around with the ratios, but I find honey works really well.
Yeah, mine is the one I have in the fridge right now is a honey one. And I also find that that's kind of forgiving. Like I've had a little bit of contamination show up, and then I was able to kind of get rid of that and save the rest of the culture, which I'm not sure if that's the case with the others too.
Well, that's actually a great point and something you point out in the book, how we talked about contamination, how it can, ruin a grow. But if you get a little bit of contamination at the liquid culture or agar plate stage, you do a great job talking about how you can still rescue some of that strain from those environments too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's just from bitter experience, really wanting to hold on to those grows, you know?
I should say, like, people should really not take risks with mold because, it's like a serious thing. You really do not want to consume any kind of mold. It can be really bad for your health. However, if you've come through a grow over like several months and you've got to your monotub stage and you see something on the corner, you can kind of like chop it off and isolate it and see what happens. There's a point at which you can kind of, if you're eagle-eyed, and kind of lucky, you can get it just at the right stage, but it can also spread like wildfire.
Yeah, we always recommend people, like, if they've got a grow that looks a little bit weird in amongst a bunch of other ones, move it somewhere else. Like, if you really can't bear to dump it, then move it somewhere else and keep an eye on it. If it starts growing fast, you're going to have to dump it, and that's going to have to be outside because you don't want to open that too often inside your growing area because all those spores, that tiny little patch of green will be millions, if not billions, of spores that will then waft out into your environment, and you've suddenly like inoculated your whole grow room with spores, and that's not something you want to do.
Yeah, yeah, and one of my early mentors and just teaching about kind of at-home cultivation would always say that when you are working with mold, if you are trying to salvage or remove any offending contamination to see if the rest of it's okay, give yourself a good buffer, whether it's an agar or whether it's on that substrate, give yourself a good buffer around the mold when you're removing it, because they're actually like to our naked eye, invisible strands already lacing out from what you can see. So it's important to give yourself enough of a buffer. But I tend to agree with Virginia that usually when I see mold, if I'm doing any kind of at-home cultivation, I bin it because I don't want that then contaminating my grow area. And then, same question for bulk substrate. What is your preferred mix of bulk substrate? And this gets into kind of an art and science, I think. A lot of people online go back and forth. Basically, what's the best kind of mycelium food to create the most amount of mushrooms? But for you guys, what are some guidelines around bulk substrate? Maybe what's your ideal mix?
If I can, I know Dr. K will have a great answer for this, but if I can just jump in and mention the monotub where we got like just a ridiculous
Yeah,
grow.
what's that
It
recipe,
was,
please?
it's the one we put in the book. So it was horse manure. And that's actually like, I feel really emotional about it because we actually had a really lovely day,
Yeah,
like out in the countryside collecting horse shit. And yeah, it was just really nice. And I have like some beautiful pictures of that day. And then it's like, well, that was the natural world, and some horse, did its business somewhere. And then we took that home and made like a ludicrous amount of shrooms. And I thought that was also just really easy as well.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the one I'll always go to now.
yeah, I think yeah, it was nice to sort of bring in the horse manure, but since I've moved to a different area now, like horse manure is harder to find, and you're definitely a lot more conspicuous when you're looking for it. If you're crouching down near a pile of horse manure, it draws some strange looks. So because you're testing it, right? You want it to be like nice and dry, and the thing is that it shouldn't smell like horse manure. So you're there crouched over a pile of horse manure, picking it up and smelling it, and people are like, "Who is this guy? Like, what is he doing?" um, I've been playing around a lot more with coir as well, which again is another good substrate. It can be a little bit higher in mold. Horse manure's got a lot more beneficial bacteria in it, whereas coir has got a lot more trichoderma and other molds. But if you pasteurize and you treat it properly, you can grow perfectly well on it. And I think the most important for a monotub grower substrate is something that's nutritionally complex. So you don't want 100% coir, you don't want 100% manure, although that would be more complex than coir. If you mix those two things together, then the coir is bringing something, the horse manure is bringing something. If you're bringing in things like coffee in small amounts or worm castings or things like that, it depends on the species always, and it depends as well on the genetics. So you can't always say like this works for this species always and will always be great. Like if you've got really good genetics, it will grow on anything really well, or it might be really favored to one specific substrate, and you might try and grow it on something else and think, oh, well, that substrate doesn't work. But then if you have another line of the same species genetics, you might actually find it kind of prefers that. It's really, there's a lot of variability. And every time I kind of make any recommendation on optimizing something that is process driven, you've always got to remember the genetic side of whatever you're doing, that there could be some variability there that makes it really hard to fully understand what you're working with as a substrate, you know?
Yeah, and as I'm asking about kind of the ideals, how important is it to document kind of your attempts and progress and what works and what doesn't? How important is that for you guys to document what you're doing?
I would say that's hugely important, and one of actually the first things you should learn. Label everything. My God, and like get a little notebook, that's just dedicated towards your things. Dates, weights, the things you're seeing. It can also be really helpful if you get into something like microdosing and you want to take notes on how you're feeling a particular day and all those kind of things. That's actually something that I've taken out of mushroom growing into the rest of my life. So, I have sourdough cultures, I have all kinds of things, and I have a teeny little yellow notebook that lives in my like apron where everything gets written down. And also if you brew beer, it's hugely helpful as well. So yeah, that's a really important thing. Dates as well, writing dates on all of your jars and things like this. Otherwise you won't know what's worked and what hasn't really worked, and you're undercutting your own ability to learn from what you're doing.
Yeah.
Obviously we've talked about then the whole cultivation process. And then there's that all important step of, how do you start round two? And I think you guys do a great job of talking about that, how as, a self-sufficient grower, you should be able to either keep grain going in a grain to grain transfer, maybe able to clone a certain mushroom from a different mushroom grow by breaking open the mushroom, taking some of the sterile tissue from the inside and culturing that out onto agar or in liquid culture. But one big thing you point out is the difference between that kind of genetic continuation of one individual versus the ability to germinate spores and kind of create something with new genetics. So, what is the difference there, and why is it important to be able to use both to kind of multiply your mycelial mass, if you will?
Yeah, so I think with spores, you've always got, I guess maybe we should start with like tissue culture because that kind of makes more sense. So you've got this concept of senescence, right? Which is like the theoretical limit, the number of times that any biological cell can survive. It's almost any. I think there are some that don't. I think lobsters is weirdly one of the biological cells that can keep going. And obviously certain cancers, they like lose their ability to senesce, which is why they get so virulent stuff. So, but with mushrooms, you're working with senescence, you're constrained by senescence. So you want to, if you think about it in like a linear fashion, every time the culture grows, the cells are dividing. And if you keep that going and you go from a grain jar to another grain jar to another, and you keep going all the way, eventually you're going to get to a point where everything's going to slow down. It might start producing mushrooms, it'll be more susceptible to contamination. So we have like good procedures, or generally there are good procedures for, if you clone a mushroom, then you create a master culture, and you always take from that master culture and you kind of go out in, like, if you imagine it like a pyramid where your master culture is at the top, you're trying to like widen that pyramid, and you want to go across rather than down in straight line, because if you continue that line as long as possible, it's eventually going to get untangled and just genetically it'll be a bit of a mess. So if you've got a good storage system, good labeling system, good master cultures, then you can keep that one particular strain of genetics going for a really long time. But if you notice things are getting laggy and you need to start again, that's the time to pull out spores and sort of start again from first principles, because you're going to have, it's like a genetic reset, because the whole recombination of the genetics has to happen at the spore level. And then you're going to have a new genetic line, which might be very different. It might not be very different to what you were working with previously as a pure culture, but you can then keep working through spores. So if you're finding your cultures are getting laggy or, contamination prone, and you've been growing them for maybe a little bit too long, then it's time to go back to spores and sort of start again, if you like.
Yeah, when I first started being able to expand things from agar, you think, oh, I can just keep this
Yeah.
same exact species going forever. And I think the book does a good job of reinforcing that idea of senescence and how important that is to be able to always have some kind of spore bank you can go back to, kind of like you're saying, start from square one if you need to.
Well, it's also like, looking at the natural world again and looking at how they grow in nature. And I think it's in this way, it's kind of analogous to like if you're growing cannabis and you can keep a mother plant that you keep clones from and you can keep that going for a long time. But like at some point, you're probably going to have to go back to seed. And that's because that's like the natural way of doing it. And all these things that grow, they want to grow in the healthiest way possible. And the way that they have learned to grow is the healthiest way possible for them. And it gives them, greater genetic diversity, and all these things are in place for a reason. This is like we need to learn from the natural world, I think. And while it is really fun to clone and was one of like my favorite things to learn because it was like magic, go back a step, I think. And also spore prints are like super easy to keep.
Yeah, and you guys recommend then putting spore prints on tinfoil, right? Because I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of spore prints, cutting off a mushroom cap, letting it sit undisturbed on a surface as it drops its spores. But you guys say that tinfoil is the best for using it for any kind of cultivation purpose.
Yeah, I think tinfoil is just because it's readily available, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in like a very small space. You can have a huge stack of spore prints. Whereas if you had that on glass or something else, you'd start to, because you can spore print in like a petri dish maybe, but then you've got the whole size of the petri dish, and if you're doing that, then you might as well have a petri dish that's got living culture on it. So spore prints on foil give you that, just it's an easy way, and you can have your little file of facts and you can alphabetize it and do whatever you want and just keep a little bank of spores that way with very little space.
Yeah, now one thing I skipped over was probably the most infamous grow method, which is PF Tech, and I think a lot of people have probably heard of. Do you recommend PF Tech as kind of the starting place for beginners? And if so, why is it such a good one to begin with?
So this is the one I learned first from Dr. K, and it's also the one I tried to do beforehand and made such a mess of. So I won't say it's idiot proof because I was idiot enough to make a real hash of it, but there's a reason it's been so popular for such a long time, and it's because it's kind of easy. It uses a bunch of things that you can readily get, like the jars I still use are the ones that you get jam in here. They're really easy. You don't really have to buy anything that is suspicious. It's all stuff you can get from like your grocery store or like a garden center and things like that. It's also kind of fun because you can watch it all happen. Like the glass jars, you can watch the mycelium growing, and then in your terrarium, you can just like keep that in your room, and watch things go. Like you can actually, I remember when I was growing once, I had a friend stay and she was sleeping in the room where we were growing, and she like got really attached to the mushrooms because you can literally watch them grow. And I also think that's a huge part of it and appreciating the process that's going on. But this book is 5 years old. I think in October it will be 5 years exactly. And there are things that have come up now that can be a lot easier. So one of those is the Uncle Ben's method,
Right.
which I was highly skeptical of.
Yeah.
But we've seen a lot of people find that really easy to use.
So, what is the Uncle Ben's method, and is this kind of the new best place to start for beginners?
Yeah, it's tricky. I guess we kind of go back and forth on it. I think the failure rate on it is higher, but because you can get hold of the rice bags so easily, you can make a lot more, and it's a lot less prep. So it depends what you really want to do. I think if you want to really like learn the process, it might not be the best, but it's definitely something that can work. And I think like people get quite angry about this newfangled method and stuff, but we've seen it work. We know that it works. We also just know it has a fairly high failure rate. Whereas PF Tech is something that sort of, it introduces you as a beginner to the basics of the processes that you'll use later on. So things like sterilization, designing your substrates, that sort of thing. It really depends on, if you just want mushrooms, then Uncle Ben's is a way to do that. If you want to learn a bit more about the processes involved, then PF Tech might be a little bit better for that. And you're going to buy some of the equipment that will then like take you through to bigger and more productive grows. So both of them have their advantages, just for different things.
For me, I think of it like when you're learning to drive a car, you can learn to drive an automatic and you can drive, you can get to where you're going. But if you then go to a country like the UK, for instance, where automatics are really rare, you are going to be in trouble because then you've got to drive a stick. Whereas if you learn to drive a stick, you can understand the feel of the car more, you can get to feel what's wrong and what's right when you're driving. And then if you need to go back and figure it out from there, you can, whereas you couldn't with the other way. So yeah, I think PF Tech is a really good way to start. And then, you know what, if you want to make it easier, you can maybe go the Uncle Ben's method and see if it works.
Yeah. And like with manual versus automatic car, it's just a lot more fun to do it,
Yeah.
to do it the way where you actually have a bit more control and a bit better understanding of what's going on. But I guess nowadays, is the monotub kind of, when it comes to at-home magic mushroom cultivation, is the monotub pretty much the standard, expanding some grain spawn out onto your whatever your chosen mix of substrate, just the maximal surface area, the whole tub's filled? I mean, is that kind of the standard now?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the good thing about monotubs is you can kind of scale them to how risky you feel like being. So, you can do like a 64 quart monotub, and if that all goes right, then you're in for a great flush. But if it goes wrong, that's all of that substrate gone. Whereas if you split that 64 quart out into some smaller ones, then not only do you kind of reduce the risk by having a bunch of isolated tubs that you can work with, but you can try different things. You could try some on a heat mat. You could try not fanning some of them. You can learn a lot more if you split things into monotubs that are of a smaller size. But generally, yeah, if you're going for huge flushes, then monotubs are definitely the way to do it. And once you dial your processing, you can increase the size if all you want is yield. But if you want to learn more, you can split it into smaller tubs and sort of play around with it.
And then what, in this book, again, it's kind of an older book, but what's your guys' general cultivation method? Is it monotub? I know in the book you said you kind of do a little bit of everything. You have little experiments going. Is it kind of like you guys are settled on one method, or do you choose a different method depending on what your goal is with that round of cultivation?
Yeah, so I think I really do sort of mix it up, and I try things that are new to me a lot. Like, I know monotubs are reliable now. I mean, most of the time I'm growing edible species. So, I'm trying different species, I'm trying different substrates and different setups, like growing oyster mushrooms on old jeans or something like that. That's a weird thing to do, but I've never
That is
tried
really
it.
weird.
Try it. So yeah, there's like everything I think has its place. Like monotubs are good for like consistent yields. I mean, even PF Tech, I will still use. Like I talked about those spores that I wasn't sure if they were the right species. I thought I got a wood living species, and then I started to suspect that maybe one that would grow on PF Tech. So I made wood versions of the PF Tech cakes. So they made the standard PF recipe, and I grew them all out. And sure enough, it grew, and it wasn't the species that I'd ordered. So they're good for like small scale pilot grows, testing things out that you're not sure about. Rather than if I'd have done a monotub with that, I would have been really disappointed because I put so much effort in. But I'd just done a quick little PF Tech check, and it worked really well. It worked really well to tell me what I didn't want to hear.
I think I have kind of Dr. K, when we're not working on the books, Dr. K is definitely the one who takes all the new steps forward and then reports back to me and sends me pictures, and I'm like, what is going on here? Whereas I tend to be like quite busy and home like a limited amount, not over the last year, but in normal times. So I still really like liquid culture to PF Tech to grain to monotub, and then I keep some dry shrooms, and then I would do a alcohol extraction, and that's like a really quick, effective kind of stream for me to get everything that I'm going to need for like to carry me through the winter.
Now, something that's come up a couple times is this idea of species. And obviously, this could be a huge conversation of itself. But, I've heard a lot of people relate different Psilocybe cubensis species to like different strains of marijuana. And, you hear things like B plus or Ecuadorians or da, da, da. How relevant are the species differences, and are we finding out a lot more about basically subvarieties within the cubensis species?
I guess, yeah, to use that sort of cannabis analogy, like it is a huge diversification of like a product, if you like, sometimes, because like people get really into like, well, we've got this strain or we've got like this strain, and this strain has this effect and this strain has that effect. But
Right.
from experience, it's not been something I've been super on board with. I think like a lot of people say to us, what strain should I pick? Because they look and they see all of these different strains of cubensis, right? Because they're all the same species. They can all interbreed, but they're just like someone has decided to call this one B plus, someone has decided to call this one, penis envy or something. And there are morphological differences, but there could be differences between effects and things like that. We just don't know. But I think for anyone looking to start out, pick a name that appeals to them, because I think most of them are about as easy to grow as each other. So when a lot of people are trying to decide on a species, on a strain, they get like a real sense of decision paralysis. And I'm like, just pick a name that sounds fun and go from there, because it's all going to work.
I actually get a lot of people asking us what strain, inverted commas, to take for like different
Right.
effects. And they've obviously come from like a cannabis world, and in terms of effects, it kind of doesn't line up like that. Like, you could take you could smoke a haze, and you're going to feel kind of heady, you're going to feel kind of creative, and that doesn't really transfer over to the mushroom world. And also there are like some strains that are, will get you high, but they don't contain psilocybin. So, the Amanita muscaria is, the probably the most well-known one, doesn't actually contain psilocybin. So learning about mushrooms in like how they grow and what they contain, I think, is really helpful. But you also need to get out of that mindset of like, well, I will, have some cubes and they will make me feel super chill, or, if I take these ones, they will give me ego death. It kind of doesn't really work like that.
I've even heard different people's kind of questioning that within even the cannabis community of, strictly sativas do this and indicas do this. So I think a lot of people are starting to question, the exact effects attributed to certain strains in general. But then this is kind of a question I don't know if you guys will have a definitive answer to, but is there any kind of way of testing compound or alkaloid content when we're talking about psilocybin or psilocin? Is there anyone doing that kind of testing or correlating that to effects? I mean, or is that largely not happening because it's still prohibited?
Yeah, I think we're on the verge of maybe seeing that, as we see new like companies entering the space and doing some like fundamental research, because a lot of it hasn't been done. I mean, you talk about the ecology of suppliers, and I kind of want like an ecology of like analytical chemists who I can take my mushrooms to and get
Right.
them to like run it through a HPLC or something and get like some good data on it, because a lot of the data that we have is from that sort of interim period between the 60s and now. And there's a lot of variability. You look at the methods that they've used, the methods aren't always directly comparable. You look at the conditions of the mushrooms, and that can vary as well. So doing like a really big systematic analysis of all these different species would be something I would love to read. I don't know about other people, but it would be super interesting, because there are more and more compounds being discovered in magic mushrooms that people weren't aware of. Or there's kind of like the old set of compounds, which is like baeocystin. Norbaeocystin was one of the newer ones, and then you've got even like beta carbolines and stuff. Like there have been some studies coming out from Usona and places in Europe where they found like new compounds even just like last year. And so I think like having that analytical chemistry side of things and having more people look at it, once it's easier to look at it from a legal perspective, then I think that's going to be super interesting.
Well, and I know a lot of the research, at least here in the States, when we talk about kind of the medicinal side of researching psilocybin and its effects in a clinical setting, a lot of the focus now is turning to just artificially derived psilocybin or psilocin. I mean, do you see that line of inquiry scientifically as really losing the potential of accurately assessing the medicinal properties of the mushrooms themselves? Because you're just talking about a lot of other compounds that are present. How much are we losing with that kind of reductionist model of just looking at isolated, psilocybin or psilocin compounds when it comes to the clinical research?
Yeah, so I think I can understand why there's an importance to focus on a single substance, because you want to know that, your effects are reproducible. You want to control as much of the process as you can so that the effects you're observing are related to the things that you've changed. So if you're using like a variable source like a mushroom, I mean, some data suggests that wild species can vary in their alkaloid content by about 10 times, and
Oh,
home
wow.
cultivated species can vary by about 4 times. So if you're doing a study with something that is that variable, it's really hard to sort of pin down the effects when your baseline is so shifty. But I think, yeah, there are definitely, well, I won't say definitely because we don't know, but like there are other alkaloids present that we know of that we don't know enough about how they affect the brain. I mean, the psilocybin and psilocin work on, the H5-2A receptor, which is one of 14 serotonin receptors in the brain. So there are all these other compounds that are structurally similar to psilocybin and psilocin. Are they affecting other serotonin receptors? We don't know. Are they affecting other biochemical processes in the body or in the brain? We just don't know. So I think seeing more done around the other compounds is going to be really interesting. Psilocybin's definitely having its moment, but there are other compounds that are of interest as well.
There's definitely research being done into the entourage effect. That's the right term, right,
Yeah.
Dr. K? And for me, it's similar to how like everyone is really desperate to get like a vitamin that is just a vitamin D or a vitamin K, but actually if you remove it from the food source, you don't get the other vitamins which actually help with uptake of that particular desirable thing. So, it's actually better to eat an orange than it is to take a vitamin C capsule. So for me, they're kind of analogous too.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that same critique, which again intuitively kind of makes sense to me with the holistic looking at the entire set of cofactors like that, the entourage effect that you're getting from other compounds. So it'll be interesting to see, as the research evolves, what directions we'll go in and how we'll start to even structure experiments that could possibly look at all those different variables of compounds.
I think it's also important to question the motives of people who are doing all this research and looking in particular ways. So, like people who want to synthesize psilocybin, what is that for? This is something Dr. K and I have been kind of talking about recently. Having worked in the cannabis field, as things got increasingly decriminalized and increasingly legalized, you really see a lot of people who come in who weren't kind of on a grassroots level, taking all the risks and doing all the
Yeah.
work. You see a lot of people coming in just to capitalize off decriminalization and legalization. And as psilocybin is increasingly decriminalized, I think that's going to happen increasingly, and you can see it starting to happen now. And you move away from the full experience. You move away. There are some reasons. There's some things you need to do this for, like psilocybin-assisted therapy, medical uses, and things like this. But if it's people trying to capitalize off the kind of community and the work that people have done for a long time and remove the experiential kind of community feel from things, I think it's always worth being critical as to what those people's motives are.
Yes, and of course, we've all heard that critique about different people, like you said, players entering the space. Whenever kind of money washes over a landscape, it inevitably changes that landscape, and not often for the better. So I think that is something really important to be cognizant of for people that have been part of this community or are interested in it from a grassroots level, to be wary of people coming in with proclamations of kind of ushering in a new renaissance. We have to always be wary of their motivations and what they stand to gain by kind of channeling things through a model that they might benefit from. Well, this whole thing surrounding research and the influence of money, that could be a podcast on its own, but I do want to make sure we cover kind of the next stage from, we just went over the whole cultivation, how to get an at-home grow started, how to keep it into the future. And then there's, once the grow's over, what do we do with, maybe it's 2,000 grams of mushrooms like you guys had from your monotub, or what do you do with the bounty or the harvest? And I guess we can start with drying. what is the best way that we can actually dry? And then why are most people working with dried magic mushrooms?
Well, for a start, when you dry them, you make them a lot more mold resistant. So obviously fresh shrooms, they will rot quite quickly. You can totally just eat fresh shrooms. Like in our original book, in the Bible, and in the Chef Cookbook that we just wrote, I think in both of them we have like a blueberry and mushroom smoothie recipe.
Yeah.
But you do have to be cognizant of the fact that the dosing is very different with fresh and dry shrooms. So when you dry shrooms, they lose like 90% of their weight, which is just the water coming out. So if a gram dry is a dose for you, then you will need 10 grams wet.
Right.
That's a thing to be thinking of. But like, just most people will dry them because it's an easier way to keep them effective for a longer time. And it's really easy to do as well. Like, I mean, still my favorite method is just to put them on a sushi rolling mat on top of the radiator, or, somewhere else they're not going to get eaten by my cats. But you can also use keeping them away from your pets and your children, the thing to say there. But you can use the dehydrator. I know a lot of people kind of overthink it and think they're kind of going to over dehydrate their shrooms.
Yeah, I think so. When you're drying them out, you're trying to reduce the effect of the enzymes in the mushrooms from breaking down the psychoactive compounds. Really, there is some chemical degradation happening as well, oxidation and that sort of thing. But yeah, by removing the water, you're giving everything a little bit less ability to move around and interact, So like if it's in a solution, chemical reactions just happen faster. If it's all dry, then things will kind of slow down. So that's kind of what you're trying to do with the dehydration. And yeah, it's always a tricky one around heat. I think people are really worried about applying too much heat and stuff. I would say like the main things to hit are like low humidity and high airflow. And then heat will just speed the process along a little bit. If you've got lots of air moving across the mushrooms and the humidity is low, then it will wick away a lot of the moisture quite quickly, even at room temperature. And then you can add temperature and get them dry fairly quick. And yeah, it really sort of, you're kind of working on those three parameters: humidity, airflow, and temperature. And if two of them are high, then you can worry less about heat. But there's some evidence that's come out recently to show that the degradation rates of psilocybin under different temperatures, you have to really be pushing over like 100 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that's in Fahrenheit. I can never do the conversion despite how many times I do that.
Neither can I, but it's much, much higher than 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, yeah. You're kind of looking at that for a sustained period before you have any problems. Not that I would suggest you take it up to that temperature, because you're starting to cook then. But you can certainly pass it through that temperature for 10 minutes or so, and you're not going to lose everything in one go, sort of thing. It's a slow decline in potency.
It's 212 Fahrenheit. I just Googled it. I also don't know.
Thank you for Googling that and setting us straight there. Well, this is, you just hit on something I hear it kind of whispers on the internet, which is, oh, you can eat the magic mushrooms fresh, again, which I think is kind of a new thing for many people. It was a new thing to me to think, oh, you can just eat the fresh mushrooms, of course. But they also said that if you cook them like other mushrooms, you will break down the chitin in their skin and make them more palatable, less nausea creating. I mean, have you guys heard anything about that? And I guess, we're coupling that with this understanding that anything over 212 degrees likely will break down psilocybin. But have you heard anything about that, like physically cooking the fresh magic mushrooms?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it. I think it gets tricky because again, you're starting to introduce more variables when you're cooking. So if you're cooking it with something, then you're going to increase like the amount of stuff in your stomach. So some people prefer to take magic mushrooms on an empty stomach. Some people it doesn't bother them at all, but some people prefer to, lightly fast beforehand. So if you're cooking them on their own, then maybe it'll make them more palatable. Well, maybe not palatable, like slimy cooked magic mushrooms by themselves don't sound hugely palatable. But if you cook that into a recipe, then you're increasing the amount of food that's going into your stomach. So if you're someone who has trouble with any amount of having a full stomach while you're experiencing magic mushrooms, then that might not be the way to go for you. But if you're someone who can eat all the way through a trip, and we do know people like that, then you can cook them and you can try some other things.
Yeah, now for you guys, what was the inspiration to get more playful with some of these? Because when I was reading the Psilocybin Chef Cookbook, there's some pretty detailed recipes. We're talking about risottos, we're talking about, grilled cheeses and hamburger. I mean, what was the impetus to start getting a lot more creative than just trying to eat, the standard bag of dried psilocybin mushrooms?
Oh, that was me. I have, over the course of my 20s and now increasingly my 30s, my body is rebelling against me and all of the things that I have done to it. So all of the substances that I put in my body, if I do it over a certain amount of time, my body will just start to reject all of it. So I got really, really nauseated. I just got to the point where even eating them dry or taking a tea would make me really, really, really nauseated to the point of kind of throwing up, which is a real waste of shrooms and also like a really not a good place to start a trip from. So like I mentioned before, Kay and I are both huge cooks and like big, like home makers in a way. Not homemakers like a like a housewife, but we we pickle things, we ferment things, we bake bread, just hippies basically. So it was like a really easy step to just come and be like, look, I can't just eat these horrible dried shrooms anymore. Like it made me even hate the taste of them in my mouth. And I think one of the first things we did was the ginger truffles, the ginger lime truffles, which is in our first book. And they were really good for me because one, they're delicious. Two, you're working with crystallized ginger, so that's a natural kind of anti-nausea thing. The lime juice in them is kind of said to begin the breakdown from psilocybin to psilocin, which is what happens inside of your body anyway. So that's kind of, I don't think any research has been done into that, but it's kind of like accepted within the community that citrus fruit and citrus juice will kind of begin that process. So it means you'll get high quicker. And they were just like really tasty. And then we were like, well, what else can we do? What does a grilled cheese look like? And then we get into molecular gastronomy, where, you look at flavor pairings, and there are a lot of things that go with mushrooms. So like blueberries and mushrooms are a really great flavor combination. And we'd experimented with these with kind of edible mushrooms as well. And we were like, well, I mean, why the hell not? We have so much shrooms. So yeah, we kind of went from there.
Yeah, and I think some of the parts of the book where you talk about, hey, we've all pretended like mushroom tea doesn't taste bad, but we all know it does. And, I think a lot of people's experience with magic mushrooms, did you realize like how not palatable it is? So I really appreciate the amount of effort you guys put into making things that just frankly sound delicious. Even if you removed the mushroom component, they would just be delicious things to eat. Are there some principles here? Because the alkaloids, the secondary metabolite that is psilocybin, is alcohol and fat soluble. So are there any considerations there, aside from what you just pointed out with lemon or lime maybe accelerating a conversion process of psilocybin? Are there any other chemical things at play when you're considering making these recipes?
Yeah, so from a chemical point of view, it's kind of tricky because, again, if you can't quantify your end product, you're passing it through a human bioassay, right? So it's like a very variable set and setting. The difference between two psychedelic experiences. You might have the exact same dose 2 months apart and find a very different experience. Now, was that something to do with the chemistry, or was that something to do with your environment? So it makes it really hard to make any, or to make too much of an authoritative claim around some things that we still don't know yet. But yeah, certainly with like the alcohol extractions, these are things that we've tried for ourselves and found that they work. So the alcohol extractions have worked quite well. You can extract it in just simple water. I mean, mushroom tea. So, you can start playing with things like coffee. And, we even did like some milk-based ones, because it will get extracted in pretty much mostly in your liquids, so mostly water, mostly alcohol, maybe a little bit in fat, but mostly it's your water and alcohol combination. It was actually Alexander Shulgin did some pretty good analysis of it and kind of looked at some of the papers and gave his like authoritative view on all of these sort of chemical interactions, solubility and stuff, with specific reference to psilocybin. So you can dig out some of his work on that, and it's really interesting to read his notes on it. So we were kind of guided by that a little bit. And then, yeah, just sort of being like, okay, so if we know it's soluble in these things, what foods have these things in them and how can we sort of incorporate that in, and then bringing in things like citric acid and, you know, lemon juice, lime juice, ginger for nausea, the molecular gastronomy, flavor pairings, having ideas around that. And yeah, we just sort of made our way through the book, sort of trying to think about all those things at the same time.
I would also say anything that you make with water, you're going to need to kind of consume it quite quickly, whereas alcohol extraction is kind of more of a longer term solution. You know, like that's the ones I keep in my freezer right now. One of the most interesting things for me was we learned about the Paul Stamets method, the cold water extraction.
The blue juice.
And I just thought, like, there's no way that works. And then we did it, and it was incredible. And, like, I mean, if you kind of want a visual impression, if you want to, like, impress somebody, that's a great one, because it just gives you this, it's literally just shaking up fresh shrooms with ice and leaving it. And then you get this amazing blue-colored liquid, and then, which you can just drink. Like, that's wild when you think about it. It's like the simplest possible method, and it really works.
Yeah, that one was definitely an eye catcher, even amongst all the other incredible recipes. But, you know, there's some great cocktails in here. You guys have a Bloody Mary made with shrooms. You guys have a pina colada, Kool-Aid, chai, and then, like I said, pasta. You get omelets, grilled cheese, desserts. I mean, it was really kind of opens up your imagination to, of course, you could start playing with all these things, but just having this as one of the ingredients. You guys have taken the time to actually think about some of these chemical interactions, the gastronomy. I definitely recommend anyone who's into cooking with any kind of mushrooms. I think this book is great to have, but especially if you want to find ways where you're exploring psilocybin mushrooms, you want to get over maybe that palatability aspect. That book is perfect and will definitely give you plenty of options. Do you guys have any favorite recipes from there that are maybe go-tos that you use for mushrooms? I know you said the truffles and the blue juice. Any other recipes that stand out that are some of the favorites for you guys?
Mine is the cheesecake. But the main issue there is then you just want to eat the whole cheesecake so you can get real high real quick.
Right, that would be the pitfall. Is these things are delicious, and suddenly before you know it, you've eaten, you know, like an ounce of dry mushrooms.
Yeah, I think for me, I really like the ones where we pair it with blueberry, because it brings in that like molecular gastronomy concept. Like, I have these conversations with people when I'm talking about cooking, and I'm like, hey, have you ever tried putting blueberry with mushrooms? And people are like, are you crazy? That sounds disgusting. And then they try it and they're like, holy crap, it's amazing. Like, it's really good. So it's a good way to sort of introduce people to that concept of cooking, but through psychedelics. I like to think we sort of pulled a reverse Michael Pollan. So he started out as a food writer and then started writing about psychedelics. We started out writing about psychedelics, and now we've moved on to food. Not that we hold ourselves in the same level of esteem as Michael Pollan. He's absolutely incredible.
Well, and Michael Pollan's actually a great example of kind of the psychedelic renaissance that's going on, where you have more and more people, especially where I live in the Bay Area, more and more people of every walk of life are starting to ask questions about, oh, you know, magic mushrooms. Oh, I heard it could help with depression. I heard it could help with, oh, have you heard of microdosing? You know, this is kind of the forefront culturally. It seems like, you know, where we're going. What do you guys think of the mass shift that's taking place? And then do you think that it should only be funneled through kind of therapeutic avenues? Or do you think that this should be a shift toward encompassing kind of spiritual and recreational use as well? Because I know right now most of the push is flying under the banner of therapy and treating an ailment. But how do you guys feel about that move? And, you know, if we should be trying to normalize use of psilocybin for other reasons as well?
For me, I welcome it hugely. Like Dr. K mentioned Dr. David Nutt before. We're both huge fans of him. In fact, I think we went to see a talk he did, if I remember correctly. Something to do with like police against criminalization of drugs, which is really good. But he has a fantastic book called Drugs Without the Hot Air, and he talks about like the therapeutic uses of things. And psilocybin is a huge one, but people are also starting to do like ketamine therapy for treatment resistant addiction, I think.
Yeah.
And like PTSD. And I think any kind of like natural substance or any kind of thing that is available to us, if it can be utilized in a way that improves people's lives, then why the hell wouldn't we do that? If depression is like a lifelong situation for a lot of people, and when they've been through, the talking therapies and things like this, it can be really terrible when they found that nothing works for them. And, just to think that that's the rest of your life, that's a huge thing to get over, and we lose people to that. We really lose people to the kind of nihilism that is born of that. So I think anything that can offer us a new avenue or a new way to look at these things is fantastic. I also don't think we shouldn't limit ourselves to like medical use or therapeutic use. Like recreational drugs are fine. Like this is what we advocate, like science-based research and science-based information is so people can make their own informed decisions. Like, you don't have to be ill to take shrooms. You don't have to like have a goal in mind. You don't really have to want to be a better person to take shrooms. You can take them because you're an adult who's capable of making your own choices. People smoke. Alcohol is a lot more dangerous for you than a lot of these substances we're talking about, especially something that grows it naturally like shrooms. And there's a concept, Dr. K, I'm sure you can remember the proper term, but like the betterment of people.
Yeah.
Is something I really strongly believe in, and I think Dr. K does too.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well, like kind of speaking to what Virginia said, I think one of the big reasons why psilocybin in its medical context and its therapeutic context is where it is because we know it is so well tolerated in humans. Like if you were to come with a brand new drug, you would have to take it through your basic clinical trial process, which can take sort of 5 to 10 years for a lot of these drugs. Psilocybin has kind of piggybacked off all of the underground research and the people who have been consuming it safely for, well, in America and in the UK, 50 years, in Central America and other places, like hundreds and hundreds of years. So, I think, yes, it's definitely important that people who need therapy have access to it and, can treat depression, can treat anxiety, post-traumatic stress. But I don't think that equally you can go to someone who's using it in like an indigenous ceremonial context and say, well, your method isn't valid because we just decided now that this treatment is medically justified and you've been doing it this way for hundreds of years and that's no longer valid anymore. So I think there's got to be room for everything. And even in a more sort of personal story is we've had people contact us who have successfully treated their depression and anxiety with the use of psilocybin mushrooms. Now they've broken the law in most countries, but are we going to say to them, that experience that you had isn't valid because you didn't do it in the proper context with the chemically isolated substance and that sort of thing? I mean, we would always recommend that people who are going to try that for themselves be really careful, find a support network, find therapists, like be aware of the legal restrictions. We definitely wouldn't want to be the authority to tell people exactly what to do there, but we still think it's a valid approach because we've seen people experience it. So yeah, I think there's got to be space for all approaches.
I also want to say on the flip side of that, none of these things are magic bullets. Like, just this week I had someone contact us and was like, how much of this do I need to take to like change my brain? And it's like, I have such huge empathy for these people because they're clearly in a lot of pain or they're clearly desperate for something, for them to find something that will like offer a very easy route out of what can very often be a terrible lifelong experience, but nothing works like that. Like, even pharmaceutical drugs don't really work like that a lot of the time. They can be part of a path or a process towards kind of like better mental health, but that involves a lot of work on your side. Also, sometimes it just won't work for you. I know some people who they would get so much from psilocybin assisted therapy, and I know other people who would hate it because their mindset just doesn't work in that way. They wouldn't be receptive to all the positives. They wouldn't be able to kind of cede control in that way. Like, there's no one size fits all kind of process here, and there is no magic bullet. And also, you really risk using it as a crutch, in the same way that people think they can't function every day if they don't have 5 coffees before they leave the house. You can get to a point where you don't think you can better yourself, or you don't think you can approach good mental health if you don't have shrooms. None of this is true. You have to look at it in a holistic way. You have to balance it within your life. So yeah, there's no one easy way to do it and then just be fixed.
Yeah. And it's coming from someone who isn't someone who consumes shrooms regularly. I'm just a firm believer in every human being's sovereignty and ability to make decisions about what they put into their body. And then we all have to determine what that responsible use looks like for ourselves. And that comes with doing the work on yourself, realizing your health, being in touch with your body and what you need when you put a substance in it, how it's affecting you. And then, obviously incorporating all the insights that we've gained over the years about set and setting and the importance that plays into any kind of experience. But I just think that shoehorning everything into just the medical model, puts you in a place where, like you said, you're invalidating other expressions of a relationship with this substance that might be totally valid. And, maybe it's just the stepping stone to get us there. Time will tell. But I think it's important to be cognizant around this conversation that we're talking about a substance that now we can regard, all the science is showing us, as a relatively safe substance for humans. And then responsible use of that, like with coffee or alcohol, or which I would argue is much more dangerous than mushrooms, is dictated on the personal level. And we have to give people that level of responsibility. One quote that I really love out of the book, talking about this responsible use and talking about it as a crutch, just, you guys write that, be careful of using any substance to escape a reality that you should really set about changing. And that really hit me as something that I think a lot of us can take wisdom from.
Yeah, definitely.
And on that kind of note, I have had conversations with people through our, Instagram presence and in kind of real life, where people have been talking to me about, like, I'm just like really severely anxious right now, and I'm looking for something to kind of alleviate that. And I'm like, well, you know what? We're living through a pandemic. Like, anxiety is a completely normal and probably really helpful response currently. Like, like, we're also feeling quite powerless. Is this the best situation in which you would like to take a psychedelic substance for the first time? Do you think that this is a great setting? Are you asking for this experience to do more than it ever possibly could? Like, are you asking it to fix the situation that currently cannot be fixed? To me, these are all questions you should ask yourself as part of that kind of, self-knowledge.
Yeah, what has been the reception of these 2 books now? I know in the community of mushroom aficionados that I know, they've been hugely impactful. But how has that writing and releasing these books changed you guys, and what's that reception been from the community?
Yeah, it's been interesting between the 2 different books, I think. Like, when we wrote the first book, we had no social media presence. We had no, like, I wouldn't say we have the finger on the pulse at our age, but like, we had no way of like taking a good look at, who's engaging with this, who enjoys it. We knew how many books we were selling, and that was kind of it. But as all of this decriminalization has been coming through, and the psychedelic renaissance, or whatever you want to call it, we've had so much more engagement with people who have had like really valuable experiences, and being able to interact with people on Instagram has been great. And then when we had the second book come out, it's been really strange, because we already had the kind of contact with people who are following us, and it's a completely different experience with the second book, because we were watching it happen in real time rather than waiting until our publishers told us how it was doing. So it's really strange, because I feel like we didn't really know what was going on with the book at the start of the first book, and now we know so much more about the second book and how people are receiving that, and it's been really interesting to compare those 2.
Yeah, the first one was a real slow burner, because we didn't have any presence. It was coming out into, like, 5 years ago, we're in a very different place to we are now, in terms of like cultural conversation, decriminalization and whatnot. And, like you said, there has been a kind of mushroom renaissance in the last, 4 or 5 years, which we were very lucky to kind of just get in before that, really. But I remember, I hate Amazon, but Amazon is the way most people sell their books now. And I remember working so hard to try and get us 50 reviews for the book, because that's like the point at which you tip over on Amazon and they start recommending you. And that just happened for the cookbook. It was no effort whatsoever. So yeah, we have built the community around the book, or I should say the community has built itself around the book over a period of, 5 years. And it's been really beautiful, to be honest. People really come to us and kind of bare their souls a little bit, or they're like, I've been doing this and what am I doing wrong? And you can say, oh, it's this. Just give this a go, and it can really put them on a new path that leads them somewhere fruitful. And I just realized that's the perfect word. But yeah, it's really brought us to some great places too. Like Dr. K went to the Fungi Academy and made some great friends there. And yeah, it's just been really fantastic.
Yeah, and I guess that is kind of a responsibility when you become a leading figure in a movement like this, where so many people are interested, but so many people are looking for direction. It does kind of put that responsibility to then be someone who's giving out good information, and suddenly your recommendations, I'm sure, feel like they matter a lot more, especially when you have more and more people coming to you. It seems like there's been a community that's kind of built up around these works, and you guys have kind of integrated in this larger, massive worldwide community about people interested in psilocybin.
We definitely have had to kind of learn to deal with that responsibility too. One of the things we have a pretty hard line on is we don't help people ID wild mushrooms that they've found somewhere, because again, people don't know. We could be any idiot on the other end of social media, So part of it is I want to tell people not to trust other random people on the internet, because we are still random people on the internet. But also it's just so dangerous. We don't want to, it's almost impossible to tell everything by a picture. We don't want to give bad advice and then someone has a terrible time. But I think part of that responsibility has been saying, don't just listen to us. Read these people, read these books, learn for yourself, understand the science, understand what's going on, and learn to come to your own position, and then see whether ours is valid. Think critically around us, but around everything to do with it as well.
And then at this point, what do these books mean to you, and what do you hope that people take away from reading them?
Yeah, I think kind of building on the idea of don't be scared to try things for yourself. We will always, with these books, we've been able to provide some really good guidelines, I would say, for people to follow that will work and give them results. But try things for yourself, that's the way you really learn, is by making lots of mistakes. So I think that's one of the things that we try and instill in people, is don't expect authorities to tell you the way to do something. Figure that out for yourself, learn a bit, make some mistakes, reach out to other people, do that kind of thing. So I think, from the book, it's just been amazing reaching out to people and sort of building that community, really, and being part of the learning process. People tell us when we make a mistake, and we take that on board. It's difficult when you write a book, because once you've written the book, your words are written down, and you might have to edit them later, and you might look at that in a few years' time and be like, what, I wish I'd have said that differently, or so we appreciate it when people come to us, and maybe not always in the best sort of attitude. They might say hey, you did this and it's terrible, and we're just like, oh god, yeah, they're right. But we try and bring that information in, and we think overall we've got a book that we're pretty happy with. I don't know, what do you think, Virginia?
Yeah, I've written other books as well, and there always is, you put all your work into it, and then you get it back and a printed copy, and you're like, oh my god, we've printed all these copies, and you open one book and you immediately see the thing that you should have seen when you were doing all the rounds of proofing, and you're like, oh, man, we spelled that wrong. Or my worst thing is, on the PF Tech recipe, we missed out how much coffee to put in, and I have had 1,000 people tell me this, and every single time I know. I knew a week after we published the book.
The first page I turned to.
Yeah, it's just always the way that we're publishing, and also like it takes so long.
Right.
You will finish a book, and then 9 months later you will have it in your hands. It's just incredible though. We could never have imagined so many people would read the book. Like, we did the first print run, and we were like, maybe in 5 years we'll sell all this. And I think we've done like 4 or 5 reprints now. We are starting to think about doing a second edition, just because there's so many things we want to update. There are so many new things. Science doesn't stop. You learn new things all the time. Things get outdated. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of working on that second edition, if that's something we can make happen.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think a lot of people are eagerly awaiting that one. And it's been interesting to see you guys become part of the fabric of this community, despite the obvious need to remain relatively anonymous. And it's just something I can relate to because I don't like to give out my name, and I kind of keep that secret as well.
I have to say, like, Dr. K ended up on a Zoom call with Paul
Oh
Stamets
yeah,
Wow.
last
yeah.
year,
Wow.
and we were both really not being cool about it.
Scrambling for the mute button while I scream.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it put you in a place where you get to meet some of the mycological idols out there.
Yeah, he was kind of blasting through really quick. I was really hoping I could grab him and have a chat, but he was, he's always in high demand. But yeah, seeing my faceless avatar right below his on the screen was like a pretty good highlight.
That's fantastic. Well, where can people find the book, and where can people find out more about you guys and your work?
They can find us on Instagram is the best place, and we're at the Mushroom Bible. We do actually have a Facebook page under the same name, but we don't really use it because I hate Facebook.
I can definitely relate to that. I don't do Facebook either. So Instagram is the best place to find you. And then I'm assuming the book is on, Amazon, bookshop.org, all the usual places.
Yeah, and also you can go and ask your local bookshop, to order it in. Like I think it was in Denver, the booksellers at Barnes and Noble got us in there, and I love that. That made me so happy.
That was great.
Yeah, I have a feeling you guys are of the mind to avoid the behemoth that is Amazon. And Virginia just confirmed that for me. So yeah, guys, get in there and request it at your local bookshop instead of going the Amazon route, maybe. And then I'm just going to move into some questions that I ask all my guests. And the first question is a mushroom that you love and why. And I might say, aside from Psilocybe cubensis, because I think that would just be too easy for you guys. And I know you love mushrooms other than psychedelic varieties. So what's a mushroom that you love and why? Maybe we can start with you, Dr. K.
So yeah, linking back to, I guess, the whole seasonality thing, like right now it's pretty like deep winter in the UK and it's pretty cold, and I just started getting out a little bit more, and I think for the last few years, like I've got into foraging quite a lot and identifying different like wild species and things, and finding something that is growing in winter was not something that I'd really thought of before. But then I've been going out recently and I've been finding lots of woodseer, and I've been finding lots of velvet shank or like enoki, and those two I really like at the moment because it's pretty much all there is out there. They can survive freezing. You can snap them off a frozen log, and then they'll be fine to use in cooking later. And especially with the velvet shank, you can really see the morphological change between the stuff you buy in like a supermarket, those really long white mushrooms that you get in a lot of like soups and things, versus the wild species, which is bright orange and like way smaller. And it's just amazing to look at two mushrooms and be like, these are the same species, they've just been grown in different conditions. So yeah, those are my two favorites right now at the moment.
And then what about yourself, Virginia?
I always love like lion's mane. It just looks incredible. But I'm also going to take the coward's way out and say it's like mycelium, like the actual mycelium that I love so much. Like the further and further you get into it and the more and more you research, it's just like absolutely crazy substance, really.
A big general question then, what has this relationship and really intimate relationship you've developed with cultivating your own fungi, what's this relationship with the fungal organism brought to your life, or how has it changed your life?
For me, it's like given me a much more objective and holistic view of not only the natural world, but myself and my place within it. So we mentioned Entangled Life by Melanie Sheldrake there, but also there's a book called Fermentation as Metaphor by Sandor Katz, which sums all this kind of stuff up and these processes up so well. And it talks about like, everything is changing. Everything is always reacting, growing, shifting, responding. Nothing is an end. And there's always the possibility of change, of betterment. Like I guess it's really weird to say that growing psilocybin mushrooms has given me a political imagination, but like it's taught me that like there is always a way.
Yeah.
And there changes there, and it's you can better things. You can create a better place, you can create a better world, you can create a better self. I realize this is the most hippie answer I could ever give, but I'm afraid it's true.
Well, it's absolutely true. A conversation I just had with someone, we talked about this ineffable quality of fungi and mushrooms that somehow lead to conversations about human organization and conversations about morality and conversations, obviously, about the interconnectivity of all things, because that's what mushrooms do. But yeah, they are this enigmatic vehicle to kind of expand into these other realms of thought, somehow make us better humans. So I definitely think you hit it on the head there. What about you, Dr. K?
Yeah, really similar. I think, it's always, as someone from like a natural sciences background, it was kind of shocking to me through the cultivation of magic mushrooms and learning more about mycology from like a self-taught perspective. It's always been sort of running in parallel to any biological science work that I've done. And I
Mm.
remember reading some of the most basic concepts in mycology in my 20s and being like, hang on a minute, there's a whole taxonomic kingdom here that has been excluded from my education as a child, and like realizing like how fungi fit in that place of they close the loop around open-ended processes that you get from a lot of like industrial agriculture where waste is like some externality for like someone else to bear, or like it'll go out as emissions, and with climate change and certain areas that are being impacted by the harmful like industrial agricultural processes, you kind of see how fungi can be used in a lot of like permaculture projects and food sovereignty projects to like bring that waste back into the process again, and restart the process. Whether you're making compost, whether you're growing mushrooms, or fermenting food in your kitchen, it's all like a fungal process, and it really like links all these ideas together. And yeah, it's been really interesting to bring fungal processes into home cooking, as well as like permaculture projects and growing and small scale projects like that reduce your dependency on larger global forces that can feel sometimes a little bit abstract, like you don't feel like you have a lot of control over that. Whereas when you're producing your own food with a community of people, like it's a lot more real and tangible.
I think, again, mushrooms are this vehicle that get people into permaculture, but even ideas of self-sufficiency and decentralization,
Yeah.
partially because that's exactly what they model as mycelium. That I think you guys are hitting it right on the head with how a lot of us feel fungi and their influence on our lives. Well, Virginia, Dr. K, this has been a fascinating conversation for me. You guys have been able to answer a lot of my really basic questions. Like I said from the outset, I am not the expert about psilocybin. So, these books were extremely educational for me as a beginner, but I think anyone out there, no matter how advanced you are, will get a ton out of both the Psilocybin Mushroom Bible and, of course, the Mushroom Cookbook. I haven't heard of anyone going as far into cooking with magic mushrooms as you guys have gone. So I highly recommend these books to anyone interested at all in psilocybin, but I think they're great to have in the library of any mushroom lover because they hit on points that will apply to any part of your relationship with fungi. So, Virginia, Dr. K, thank you so much for making the time and coming on the Mushroom Hour. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. You've been so kind.
Yeah, thanks so much. Super grateful for you to have us on. It's been really fun. These last 2 hours have gone by in a flash.